Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, and welcome to this Techstrong learning experience brought to you by Techstrong Research. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting panel ahead. First, I do need to cover just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session was being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, maybe you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, and we really hope you do, as this is going to be kind of a Q&A based program, we want you to send your questions into that Q&A tab on the right side of the screen. Over on that right side of the screen, you'll also see a chat tab, and I'd like you to use that for more general comments. So go ahead and start warming that up for me by letting us know from where you are joining. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around to see if you're one of our winners. So our discussion today is AI in machine learning, and I'm joined by Mike Vizard, Chief Content Officer here at Techstrong Group, and Mitchell Ashley, CTO at Techstrong Group and Principal of Techstrong Research. So Mike and Mitch, thank you both so much for being here. Mike, do you want to go ahead and get us kicked off?
Hey, all, thanks for coming. I guess I want to get started with what's top of mind for everybody these days, or so it seems to us, is that everybody seems to be freaking out about ChatGPT and these generative models that can create all kinds of content. And the issue is the bad guys apparently can use this as well, even though there may be some guardrails here and there. But it turns out that guardrails are just that. They can be bent and removed and played with as much as they like. And it turns out, well, this stuff's pretty sophisticated. So Mitch, let's just jump right in. I mean, are we looking at cybersecurity Armageddon here? Is this going to be the thing that finally overwhelms all our defenses, because this thing is going to create phishing scams and all kinds of interesting use cases for code even that we're not ready for?
Well, you're going right for the Asimov movie, aren't you? Well, yeah, it's interesting, because Mike, I started actually early in my career. I did AI work in research, and most of that was back in Prolog and Lisp and forward and backward chaining, expert system models and things like that. And back then it was Marvin Minsky and Society of Mind was a lot of the thinking of basically how do we turn computers into the way people think? How do we do that? And of course, that's never happened yet, but we're certainly getting much, much closer to AI systems emulating that. Still no, true cognitive intelligence yet, but people are arguing maybe ChatGPT version N7 or whatever it is may get there for us. So it's interesting to watch the evolution of this. And it's kind of been happening in the background. You and I have heard from a lot of vendors, yes, we have machine learning, we have AI in our products, and kind of really get sort of a fuzzy answer about what's it doing and what benefits is it providing in a lot of cases. But with ChatGPT and the family of generative AI technologies, some of them coming out of open.ai and other models, it's starting to be useful to the general population, and it encroaching into search engine world, right? I mean, you can use perplexity.ai to be your search. Tell me about this. What is that? And it sounds like something, well, it is something that someone wrote. So I think, in terms of security, now the natural questions are, okay, the bad guys will exploit it. Will they exploit it faster than we do, which they typically do, right? We're oftentimes chasing where they go. And what are the implications to security? And, will we end up in the cyber wars sooner than later of AI fighting AI, which we may already be in some cases, who knows? I'm not in the DoD space anymore, but we may be there.
We may be. There's already a report out from BlackBerry. It's up on Security Boulevard if you folks want to go check it out. But they're saying that most cybersecurity folks believe that we'll see attacks using this stuff this year, and they think nation states will be at the forefront of that. So for all we know, maybe these attacks are already happening. What's your sense of how quickly is all this going to come to fruition?
Well, if people are writing papers for high school and college, and maybe for their marketing language or their research paper, whatever it might be, attackers are already using it. I mean, it's perfect for social engineering, right? I mean, what it's lacking is personalization. You can't say, I want to write something, an email like Mitch Ashley would write an email. We aren't there yet, but you can sure create text, create content that's sounds much more human generated than a lot of what we've seen. Certainly the the emails from Africa with lots of misspellings and misused words or whatever, we're all used to those. I need a place to give you $50 million in a bank account to put it in. So I think that's a pretty easy prediction. I think it's already happening. It's unavoidable. I mean, just given how well suited it is, generative AI in general is for phishing. We should probably talk about kind of what generative AI is for folks that may not know.
Yeah, why don't you jump into that a little bit and kind of walk people through exactly how this thing works and how it might be used for nefarious purposes?
Sure, absolutely. Now, again, I'm not a researcher in AI anymore. That was long ago in my career, but it's kind of interesting. Machine learning became a hot topic for a while because we have so much data that machines can do unsupervised learning with. And we kind of have the same techniques in this thing called generative AI. Generative AI is creating content using algorithms that look like something a human might have created or did create. But it's based on training, based on data that it's been trained on. And we talked about Chat GPT. It's been trained on data going up to 2021. So it's not quite as current, but new variations. I'm sure we'll talk about it. New versions that are coming out. But it's lots of different kinds of content. It's writing content. It's audio. It's code. It's art. It's images, simulations, software, videos, all kinds of things. So it's creating things by you telling something, giving it some information, and it using all of this data that is trained on to generate some type of an output for you in whatever form. And those are all, writing, coding, translation, text, productivity software for taking notes during meetings, search engines, of course, a big topic right now.
So to that end, we've always had search dorking, right? It's a term that people use to kind of go find ways to use search engines to create content for them. And it took a little skill and effort. And now, something is serious when we have new nomenclature. There's a new term called prompt dorking, right? So basically the way that these platforms work is you send them a prompt. And if you keep tweaking that prompt, it will generate enough results for you to maybe launch some sort of sophisticated phishing attack. And that's kind of cool and interesting. And it takes a little skill, I think, to master that ultimately. But these guys have more time and money than all of us combined. So they have the resources to go play with that. Is it your sense that we're all going to have to, on some level, develop, some kind of prompt dorking skills to use this thing? Or will it ultimately be so sophisticated that it will function better than a search engine, and I'll just generate my usual 5-line or maybe 5-word query and something amazing will come back?
Well, in a way, the search engines have already trained us to do this. Like when I want to find somebody on LinkedIn, I don't go to LinkedIn. I type in person's name, company, LinkedIn, and that will typically find them or some topic. So you kind of learn the architecture, the nomenclature of the search engine, right? So we already are prompt dorking in that sense. And what you're talking about is really pulling artifacts or information out of other things like images, videos, descriptions that go along with, alt text that might be on an image to get you information. And of course, you can do that now with generative AI as well, too. So, you can go to one of these sites, Perplexity, I just happened to be using the other day for a project. And, you learn how to ask it questions to get the kind of information back that you want. And of course, the more sophisticated it gets, more data points that it has for research, the less you'll have to do that. The more natural language, you can enter into it, because you can't really type a question into Google right now. It's a lot of wasted words. You really just want to focus on the keywords. I think we'll have to do less of that. We already do with generative AI. By the way, Christopher out in our in our audience says ChatGPT has already been cloned without the guardrails. Of course, you knew that was hour 2 of it, the current version being released, right?
And that brings up an interesting point, because I think there's a question here also about how knowledgeable is this thing? And we're at 2021 for content at the moment, and that's GPT-3, but 3.5 is floating around out there, and that's supposed to be more current. And then beyond that, we're looking at 4, 5, and 6 might be multimodal, in the sense that it's not just text. It could be video, it could be audio, it could be all kinds of interesting things. So will we be able to distinguish what's real content and what's not as we go along here? And do we need some mechanisms for maybe, I don't know, identifying usage of ChatGPT in various messages? And can we build that into a security problem?
Mm-hmm. Well, so you talked about GPT-3, which is what ChatGPT is based on, at least the current Rev 4 is either out or coming out. There was a lot of kind of buzz about it back in September last year when the CEO of OpenAI talked about it and kind of made some big claims about it. But essentially, we're working with models that are not cognitive aware of what they're talking about, right? They're very much AI models like we had, which are learning based. And there's, in the machine learning world, there's 2 types of approaches, to simplify it down to 2. There's supervised, which you say, that's a picture of a dog. That's not a picture of a dog. And you do that enough times and enough people train different images, the AI algorithms can know what about an image helps you say that there's a dog in that image, just to pick an example. Well, we kind of do the same thing too already, right? I mean, ChatGPT is just based on a massive amount of learning. I think it's 175 billion parameters that it's based on. And I'm not smart enough to know what all what those parameters are, 175 billion of them. But, we train AI just by using it, because when we re-enter a question multiple ways to find the answer that we're looking for, that's one way of training. As we click a like button, and you'll notice a lot of these tools have like button. Okay, good. That was helpful. That's telling it that whatever you asked for, that answer had it in it. Now it's going to use, those algorithms to learn what are the data points that help it detect when it has the kind of content that you're asking for. I think what's interesting is you start to mix in not just text, but of course AI. And where it gets a little bit scary in the security world is, if there's videos of Mitch drinking, Coke Zero all the time, and he plays guitars and whatever other things you pick up from lots of images from webinars and conferences and things that you do. Enough data points, it may be able to build its own kind of neural model of what you are about, even though it doesn't know what a Coke Zero is, right? So there's predictions by, say, 2030, GPT-7, who knows, somewhere around 1 trillion parameters, but that's when it achieves sort of cognitive aware of, it knows what it's talking about. I'm not sure what that means. When does a learning model really understand what a Coke Zero is and what it tastes like and why someone would drink that, or whatever it is that it's purporting back to you, and is, that's sort of the science fiction consciousness and all that kind of thing. But there is a lot of conversation about, what we get today. It doesn't really know what it's talking about. It's just based on these learning parameters that it's put together. And as that gets bigger and bigger, obviously the smarter it looks, whether it's truly intelligent or not.
Right. We only get smarter by small degrees, and the machine is getting smarter by leaps and bounds. So where this thing might be a year from now will be beyond what anybody's really thinking about.
And remembers what it got smart about. We forget about the things we might have learned, right?
This is true. But Steve C. brings up an interesting point also about, so this thing can also be used to generate code, and it might be able to generate malicious code that looks like you're going to use it to patch some sort of vulnerability somewhere, and then it turns out that it's just going to hijack the entire application. We've been talking about the concerns about the software supply chain for a while now, and it's a huge problem as it is. So is this about to get worse?
Well, I mean, you have things like Copilot in GitHub, and there are the many other kind of code creators. I think there's the benevolent version of this, and then of course, the negative, the evil part of this, if you will. I mean, myself as a software developer, and haven't done that in my background, I'd love to not write the same code all the time, and we're trying to go find the library of the code or whatever. I might have done this before, and have that sort of body of knowledge of what I've worked on and problems that I've already solved, and then I'll work on the new ones with, code assist to kind of help me along the way. So think how much faster you could work by doing that. I mean, we see just simple versions of this with IDEs today that complete your line of code for you, because it knows what the potential parameters are. You add some intelligence to that, and it says most of the time I see you select this under these conditions. The downside of it is creating code, of course, that can be used to attack, but also creating code that emulates what a person might have submitted. So I may not know how to write the software you write, but if I can get to your account on GitHub and submit some code that looks something like a human generated, maybe even closer to what you generated, and that gets ingested into your software supply chain at the development process in the beginning, okay, guess what? Yeah, we're in a bad state pretty quickly. And I think that's what a lot of us are concerned about, of what are the ways that we may still use kind of traditional hacking techniques to get in, but then we get these malicious code built into software supply chains, and now all of a sudden we have multiple ways of getting in that we don't have to use a person to get in.
Do you think also that we might get to the point where I'm just going to show some GPT platform a particular type of vulnerability, and then I'm going to go tell it, find me all the instances of where this vulnerability exists, and then I'm going to go to town on it, right? Because there's a lot of stuff out there that hasn't been patched for billions of reasons that go into the history of technical debt. But is that also going to be something we're going to have to look at?
Well, we have repositories of that today. We have vulnerability scanners today, right, that tell us, we know about a lot of vulnerabilities. I was just having this conversation with someone from Akamai talking about VMware images and using those for ransomware by using vulnerabilities to get in and encrypt your VMware image of whatever sort. So there's a lot of data available. And if you imagine if a hacker got access to a code scanning service and vulnerabilities, and you apply the CVEs to all of that, there's a ton of data. I'm sure it's already being used by attackers. So I think we've got a lot of data already to tell us what the vulnerabilities are. I think the ways of exploiting it and getting people to give you access, because not every vulnerability is accessible to someone externally, right? Just because it has a vulnerability doesn't mean you can get to it. But if I can get around that through other code, through social engineering, through config and script changes, so it isn't just application code. Imagine if you had in a script somewhere, a line of code or logic being added to your script, that could do some pretty serious damage. So it is a big concern, and the problem that I really question about this is every IT organization isn't going to have the time to go figure out how to solve all these problems, right? Or how to protect themselves from it. A lot of us are learning, generative AI as we kind of do our work. It's a relatively new thing to 99% of the population. So we're going to have to rely on researchers and technology companies and educational institutions to really help us try to be as smart as or smarter than hackers that are applying the same technology, leveraging it to their benefit.
Yeah. Now, every tool can be used for good and ill. And there's a lot of good things floating around in here if we think this through a little bit, and maybe we'll walk through some of these. But if I can also use this tool to find instances of code that might be vulnerable, then I might be able to remediate that faster, because I'm going to be able to use this tool to find my own issues, because most of the time, it seems to me at least, most people don't know they have a vulnerability till it's too late.
So here's a good example of the good side of that. So Unpatched systems are still one of the major causes, and misconfigurations are the two major causes of things being exploited, hackers getting in. And part of the problem is we apply the same method of patching systems that we've done 20, 30 years ago. I mean, we may have automated more of it, but it's still the same process. There's a lot of regression testing and system testing, because an infrastructure piece of code that I need to update isn't just update it and go, right? I have to do a lot of application testing. So let's apply some AI to that. What if we were able to start to determine what kind of code changes have minimal impact? I need to do less testing or no testing, and what things do potentially have big impact on, let's say, an open source project that's used by a lot of people. If we applied that kind of a learning model, maybe we start to make a bigger dent in the technical debt and the unpatched systems. That could be a great use of AI. And I'd love to see something like that, step up and help us all, instead of going through the same regression tests for virtually every kind of patch that we do, instead of, and be more selective and intelligent, if you will, about our process.
Another segment of the community that seems pretty happy, I think mostly, we'll see, but the folks who write all those security controls are jumping up and down and going, hey, this is going to be great, because now I can match that security control specifically to whatever regulatory document is out there. So will this change the way we think about building and applying our controls?
And the reports, the attestations for those controls, right? You want to write the fifth of 5 years of the whatever compliance report? No, I don't want to do that. Write that for me. Here's the data. Here's what we have. I mean, it can be for a ton of good, and save us all a lot of headache. I mean, maybe there's people who really enjoy that. I'm sure there are. I'm not happen to be one of them. I would guess that there's less than more. But I think there are places like that where it definitely can save us work, take the toil, if you will, using an SRE term. Out of the job for us, right? Do we really need to spend a week writing that report again, as opposed to, here you go, here's 3/4 of it, now finish the rest of it?
What is your sense of the overall state of AI and cybersecurity for the purposes of the good? We've been talking about it now for a while, but it seems to me there's a lot of cynicism about it. There's a lot of folks who say these tools today don't really add a lot of value. They kind of take on some really redundant task or piece of toil, that, as you described it. But do these things need to get better faster? Because it seems like we're not really moving the ball along as fast as people might have hoped for initially, or at least we're afraid of.
Good. It's a good question, because we all hear about, AI is in whatever products, as I mentioned before, and we're all suspicious about, is that a case statement, an if statement, or is it really AI algorithms, and what is it really doing for us? I think we're still in the era of still early adoption of just machine learning algorithms, right? And the rise of, why did machine learning, pop out to be such an important thing out of all of the areas of AI research that are happening? And my version of that, which I picked up from a researcher from a company that I used to work before, because I asked him the same question: why machine learning? Why is that suddenly the thing? This is 5 years ago, and his answer was, well, one of the reasons is unsupervised learning. You have so much data available now because we keep so much more of it around. And I would add to that, and now we add so much more telemetry to our applications, our infrastructure code, all these logs, all of this observability data, that there's a lot of data to apply machine learning. And I feel like there's still a lot of growth in security just leveraging the data. If you imagine, take all the data in your SIM for your security manager and everyone else's, and we really applied some machine learning to it, there could be some substantial learnings. Well, you can do that as a service provider, anonymize it, and apply machine learning. It's just how sophisticated are you and skilled are you at writing machine learning code? Chat GPT and generative AI is popping on the scene because it suddenly is usable by the broader population. And I think we're going to see that in search engines and a lot of that first, right? Chatbots and stuff, kind of the obvious applications. Is it the biggest security concern and where we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck right now? I think it's I think we need to figure out what we need to do to protect ourselves and identify more the identity and authenticity of where that source is coming from. And is it really a person? Is the person that I think of it as? Kind of sounds like the same old identity management challenges, while we're still getting more faster gains in machine learning. I mean, that's just my prediction. We'll see where it could take off and surpass it for all I know. But I still think we have a lot of runway left in just machine learning algorithms and the data that we're creating today.
Do you think that maybe at the end of the day, the lawyers are going to have a field day here? Because let's say, for instance, somebody launches a phishing attack using data that they collected using these tools. And of course, there's open source tools that they can probably create their own foundation for this kind of attack, like that, as you were describing earlier. But if they wind up using something that's provided by Microsoft or Google, is somebody going to turn around and say, hey guys, you didn't really take enough care to how this platform was used? And the lawyer is going to say, you owe us damages because it's the equivalent of, giving people a car with no brakes.
Well, there's the sort of reasonable care. I'm not a lawyer, but there's the reasonable care, right? The what is sort of normative for the industry, and have you taken those practices and at least done something, within reason? Lawyers are in one business, either to write law, write contracts, or to sue people or go after people who aren't in compliance. That's oversimplifying it, but of course there's going to be a lot of, I think, undeveloped case law in this whole area that we haven't even just started. I mean, just imagine I'm talking to a chatbot and the chatbot recommends you do something. Well, what if that something is actually, imagine I'm talking to a drug manufacturer, right? And I'm talking to their chatbot and it's recommending a certain path, a prescriptive path kind of thing based on some AI chatbot. And unless you really control what that chatbot's going to recommend to people using it, you're potentially opening them up to, maybe health and even, life damaging kinds of outcomes. So of course, it's going to be a great area to go into if you want to be a lawyer, if you're in law school right now.
Well, the irony is that some lawyer is probably going to use ChatGPT to file a lawsuit against somebody for using ChatGPT.
Well, and I saw somewhere you can get a passing grade, maybe not the best grade, using ChatGPT for your bar exam. I don't know if that's really true. Someone said they tried it, but yeah. So that's the, I was telling you earlier, I've seen videos of I can't say it because I have a device. I think it might be turned on, but one of the Amazon devices that, you talking to another one of the Amazon devices and getting into this loop. I mean, now you're escalating into what you were talking about of maybe we're getting into the AI wars, right? It's my AI defenses or maybe my offenses attacking your defenses, even if I'm the good guy, right? Trying to take you down before you get me.
Well, I think you come to the point, are we involved in some sort of AI arms race here without realizing it? And we've kind of stumbled into this, and now we're going to be waiting on, I guess, vendors to increase their AI capabilities within the tools that we're using to protect people from these AI and augmented attacks. And is this the new world we live in?
I think we're already in it. I mean, we're in the ransomware arms race, right? Aren't we? And if generative AI or other forms of AI can give the attackers an advantage, and I think it does potentially, of other ways of exploiting and putting into a ransomware situation. Yeah. Now the question is, does AI fight AI? And we're kind of into, at least today, the science fiction realm of that. But once AI is part of so much of our software, it's kind of in there by default. So I think we're headed towards some form of that. Is it Armageddon? That's the movie. We'll have to watch the movie to see the outcome of that, at least for now. The evil robot overlords have not, Skynet has not taken over yet, but so much of science fiction turns into reality eventually, right?
Well, one of our attendees is Akram is looking for a little career advice apparently, and he wants to know: would you suggest that people who are going to develop new products should they maybe start working with research papers, or should they just jump in and start creating stuff and see what happens?
So it's a really great question. If you want to be in research, then yes, go down the research path, and there's a lot of great people to follow. It's pretty easy to go and find some of the sources, and some of the articles I think we have in our handout section even have some great links to that kind of content. The cool thing about this technology is, we do things differently than we did maybe 5 years ago. Everything is built with APIs now. So ChatGPT, all of these different tools, most of them have APIs that are available to you to start writing code. You can go to any learning site and learn how to write machine learning code in Python or your favorite language of choice. So I think there's a lot of most of the learning and doing this is learning about it, but most of it is doing it, because the technology isn't the important part. It's what you use it to, what you apply it to. What are you going to use machine learning algorithms for? They don't figure out what to apply it to. You do that. And that's one of the best ways to learn this. So if I wanted to learn about this stuff, I'd go, get myself an account when you can, ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever art generation, whatever you want to use, and start using the APIs if you're a developer. And I think you'll get the fastest learning curve, because you'll be able to see what you can do, and then you can start to understand what problems to apply this to.
Of course, all the noise in this space is around OpenAI and their relationship with Microsoft, and they've got this kind of private beta program going, and Google said roughly the equivalent of, as soon as we get off this couch, we'll have one too. But I guess the issue that I'm kind of trying to wrap my head around is, how many of these models might there be out there? Because it seems to me like there's not just going to be two, there might be tens, hundreds, and this is just going to be almost everywhere.
Well, think about it. It's not like accounting software where here's all the ways that you put a data in and could produce reports and put things against a general ledger or whatever. AI is models, and models fed by data that then that can act upon. And it all depends on what data that you feed into it. So if you're Microsoft and you feed your search data into it, maybe you feed other data into it from Azure or from the products that you provide, your own research, et cetera, versus what Google does. I mean, I think there isn't going to be one generative AI to rule them all, right? To use that reference. I think it's still very specialized, depending upon what it's trained upon. And that goes back to the application. So at least from my viewpoint, I don't think we're all heading towards one point where there is one model that controls the world or is the most useful for everything. Now, Google is very threatened, of course, by this, right? By Microsoft with Bing doing what they're doing. And you can see some of these tools. Like, I don't use Google or Bing or other things for the things I used to. I use some generative AI search tools to find things. It's actually much more, it's narrower in its results, and sometimes it's better than what I get from a general search type engine. If that becomes more popular, and I think there's a very good chance it will, the current search engine model, is at risk. And that's why Google is, we get off the Zoom call or the whatever call, and 5 minutes later, there'll be a new Google tool to do something in generative AI. But that's my view of it anyway.
One of the other things that comes to mind is, if I look at the history of where we have been with AI, initially it required a massive amount of data to train something. And then over time, the amount of data required to train something seemed to get smaller and smaller. And I wonder if that same trend line will apply to this as well. And we might be, a couple of years down the road from now, looking at a world where you don't have to aggregate, a massive amount of data to train a model to do something interesting, and that will eventually lead to the democratization of this whole thing. I mean, is that within the realm of possibility?
I think it is for some things, Mike. If you think about applying AI to a very specific problem, like let's say the telecom person coming into your office to install a product, and what all the potential issues might occur with them troubleshooting some kind of an issue. That, there's probably a fixed set. Maybe it's fairly large, but over time those things don't change until the technology change. The opposite, though, is with generative AI. Why they talk about, by GPT-7 of having, trillions of data points, of parameters. The reason is you need more information to try to look like what you're adding is knowledge or context, right? Making it sound more authentic, like it knows what it's generating, even though it doesn't, right? And so in that kind of a problem space, you need a lot more data. And that's what's happening now, at least partially, with the advancement in the versions of GPT, at least for the foreseeable future. Now you can take that and then narrow it to specific domains too. So I think it's a lot of both, Mike, is what my view is.
Mm-hmm. And then we have a question from Dave S., who's wants to know, well, is that going to be easy to manage them, or will these require, I don't know, GPT ops specialists, and we'll have best practices in the whole 9 yards?
Well, we have AI ops and systems for managing AI models today, right? And they are, because models are very sophisticated, the models and then the data. It's kind of you're improving two things continuously: the data that you feed into models and the models themselves, right? They're getting better and more accurate by you tuning them both. Now, will you and I be managing our own ChatGPT or generative AI models? Maybe someday for some things, when that becomes an easy enough process and we don't have to have AI researchers to do it for us on our teams, or super specialized analysts to do that. But increasingly, I think we're all going to have forms of AI models in our products and in our code and in some of our systems, whether you're an insurance provider in the medical field or financial services, whatever it may be. Maybe you don't need one to work at the 7-Eleven, but you might need one to manage the supply chain for 7-Eleven and all the stores across the world. So I think the answer is yes at some level, but we aren't going to all have to have 1 trillion parameters in our model, something that large. I think that's at a much different scale, at least, that we'll need to deal with.
Maybe tweaking or customizing somebody else's model as I go along. We have a great question from Anna, who wants to know, how do we evaluate whether an AI tool, once we put it into something like a dev SecOps kind of workflow, is in your mind, is there going to be some way to determine how reliable and trustworthy those models are before you stick them into those workflows?
Well, I think it's the same thing we've experienced in security of there's providing you information and there's taking action on that information, right? We have this all the way back to maybe even before intrusion prevention, intrusion detection systems, right? It's one thing to turn it on and it tell you these attacks are happening. It's another to actually have it block attacks for you. Now that got better and better, but we're still pretty cautious about putting things into automation mode that can have very serious consequences if they're wrong. So I think the same thing applies in a sort of workflow pipeline, DevOps tool chain. If it's identifying vulnerabilities in code, great. If it's fixing vulnerabilities in code that are well known and reliable to fix, great, not a problem. Just to pick one example of what AI might do in our tool chain. If it's pushing the boundary and something kind of really not very common and pretty rare, maybe that's the time to look for, is it recommending or providing me information or pointing to me to something valuable and kind of reducing the noise so I'm getting to the true issue? That I think is where that's more valuable than let's just turn it loose and see what happens. I don't think any of us want to do that. So it's a matter of kind of what we're applying it to. And, maybe all this code will be written automatically by itself when the code writes itself. But, we've had code generators for decades and still we don't have code that truly writes itself.
True. And the code that does get written is sometimes suspect. Do you think we will have checks and balances that feel like this, where I might have a model that does one thing and I might have another model that double checks the thing that the first model did, just to make sure that I have some sort of reference? Because otherwise, it seems to me, the models will just generate a massive amount of alerts, and we're already choking on the alerts that we do have. So how do we kind of like strike some reasonable balance here?
Well, think about it this way. I, as a consumer of what you might be selling me, I may have an AI model that I apply against your product, right? Or against your model, right? To check you. That I think is another interesting kind of legal aspect of this, of what are some acceptable practices around AI. I have to fill out privacy and security surveys for customers and suppliers and things like that for who we work with. Imagine that we're doing that about AI and models that we're using. I think that's very a thing you can foresee not too far down the road. And is the AI checking the AI? Yeah, I think that's inevitable as well.
We talked about lawyers, but a subset of lawyers are politicians. Do you think that the folks in Congress and White House and all these other places have a clue what all this means? And, are they going to be able to actually generate anything meaningful that may either help or, for that matter, probably hinder? I think it was Ronald Reagan who said the 9 most dangerous words in the English language are, "Hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." What's your sense of what will happen, in these various deliberative bodies around the world as they start to understand the implications for all of this? And because a lot of people may not be able to adjust, and there's going to be all kinds of noise in the system.
Well, I mean, our politicians can't even figure out what's a fake tweet and a real tweet right now. So I'm not too optimistic they're going to be able to tell us what to do about AI and generative AI and machine learning. I think more than likely, like we saw the executive order in security that was issued last year, at some point we may get to that kind of a thing where there are some NIST guidelines or some, executive order type of guidelines, which most often aren't prescriptive of what you should do, but, some form of define what compliance is in your world and then meet that compliance, right? NIST tends to be more prescriptive than others. But I think we're also potentially entering a world of banning AI from systems. I don't want, if I'm from this country and I'm buying technology from your country, I don't want your AI in my software or my service that I use from you, because I don't know what you're doing with that. So I think that's the other counterbalances of, do we have, sort of selective or discriminated against unknown AI and what it's doing, and saying, I don't want to buy anything that has that in it, or you're forbidden to use that part of it. Do I really want to? I already kind of don't enjoy lots of social media, which I used it a lot for a while, and now I don't like what they're doing with the data. Well, same thing with AI. I don't want Facebook to emulate me. I don't want Twitter to be able to generate tweets like I might write. So, I think there's that backlash to this too, is the more that it customizes to look like it's from something that it isn't, which we're kind of already there. I think there's be a reticence to use it.
Do we ban it, or is it more a question of requiring people to have a transparent approach to it so that we can evaluate it and see what's going on in there, and that there are no surprises or hidden processes in there that are designed to benefit somebody at our expense? And maybe that's where we go. And who knows, maybe there needs to be like a cabinet official who's in charge of AI.
You're scaring me again. Well, I think one possible path that makes sense to me is, if you remember, we went through this cycle of I'm not going to buy your cloud service because my data is stored in your country. It's not in my sovereignty, right? And that's still true in many areas where. So what service providers then do is, set up operations in those countries, and that data stays there and stays there and is retained within the sovereign border and control, or at least to some degree of that country. I could see the same thing happening for models, right? I don't want my model that's being created by you stored in San Jose, California, but if you want to put it in Quebec and operate it there and not let that data go over the border of the internet, if there is such a thing, maybe that's kind of a model that we're headed towards, at least for some things, as opposed to outright banning it. Because you may have bans, but then you also lose the advantage of it too. So you may be shooting yourself in the foot.
Samir has a question about AI not being feasible for small businesses, but it seems to me, at least, maybe a business isn't going to go build these as much as they're going to invoke them as a cloud service. Is that how to think about these things? Maybe they're just going to be yet one more thing we call through an API.
I think it's more built into what you use, right? A small business probably doesn't write a lot of code, for example, probably doesn't do its own security, uses some form of an outsourced service or a cloud service or service provider. I think the same thing. Are you going to go build your own AI model? Maybe someday it'll be that easy. I think we're probably not there. I think you're more likely to use a low code, no code generator, tool to create an application that has AI built into it to do certain very specific targeted things. On the other hand, I think you'll be using it a lot in search engines and writing tools and translators and maybe image systems analysis or creators of those things. So I think we'll be using it, but we won't be programming it, especially as a small business.
What is your best advice to both two constituencies, right? And let's do with the first one, which is we have a lot of new people who are just entering the cybersecurity field, and should they be entering, or is this going to eliminate the millions and job openings that we've been talking about for years and we can't fulfill, and maybe people should be rethinking their careers, or maybe they should target their career in a certain direction given where we're headed at the moment?
Well, oftentimes, most time when you introduce a new technology, it creates opportunity and uncertainty. And both of those things usually mean new jobs or changes in existing jobs. They don't often mean taking away, completely eliminating jobs. I mean, we may not have a lot of people hanging tapes and loading paper and printers like they did in the 60s and 70s. But, that said, we still have a lot of people who do many of the same functions, but maybe just a little bit differently, or have elevated from racking and stacking equipment in a data center to managing a virtual environment with VMware or Azure or some other Amazon or some other platform. If you're thinking about security, I think there's no better time to get in it, because it's not like, here am I saying this. I don't think tomorrow suddenly things are going to change and everything we did is not valid anymore unless you know this, you're out of a job. I think it's an evolution of this. And if you're entering the market, I think you're at an advantage because you're already using this, you're taking advantage of it. And it's oftentimes the people who are slow to understand it who fall behind and then have to figure out what to do. I mean, what I would do, whether you're 35 years into your career or 5 months into your career, is get after it, go use it, go figure it out, understand what it is, read content, whether it's Techstrong research or, our sites or other sites about what's happening, because it's moving very fast. And I think the more you understand it, the better you'll know how to leverage it. I think opportunities. Imagine maybe there's an AI specialist in security someday, and it's the person who's writing or managing these models or using the services that do things that we don't do that way today. I would think it's all upside at the moment.
For the folks who've been in the industry for a long time, it's a similar conversation, but there's an issue in the sense that a lot of them are specialists and heavily invested in I don't know, some of them perceive themselves as network security people, other are application security people. Is this all going to converge in a way that AI will force the dropping of all these different silos and specialties that have emerged over the years, because we are going to be looking at it much more comprehensively?
Well, I think it certainly will change or evolve our jobs, right? I mean, not too long ago, SRE didn't exist as a job. Not too long ago, security people, didn't have any interest in finding out what the software people were really doing and how they write code, right? And now we're having, DevSecOps and much more conversations with much greater fidelity about what do we do to help create more secure software. Does it all converge into one thing? I think maybe it helps. It can help to break down some silos, but I don't see it becoming the thing that replaces everything else, or whole scale replaces certain job functions yet. I could be entirely wrong. I think it will create new jobs and there'll be a new SRE of AI, or a new platform engineering of AI, or a new security engineering of AI, some kind of role that incorporates that into it. But I think it'll be more of an evolution, maybe a specialty of those roles. So, there's a really good question too. Maybe you were going to bring it up. How will AI handle cultural differences, right? Which I think is an awesome question, because we saw this or have seen this with facial recognition, right? And you had the issues of two major factors with it. One, the people who were writing the code, writing the models, the logic, the algorithms that do recognition, and then the data that it's based upon. So if you go train your AI models based all on, middle-aged white guys or people of this age and this background and this environment, that's what your model's going to be. And it's only going to know or base its decisions or information on the data that it's retained or used to train the model. So how will it handle cultural differences? I think the best thing is we train the models based on a broad set of cultural differences, backgrounds, experiences, whatever the application may be. And then we get models that are representative and valuable to not just one particular audience or one kind of person, one kind of background. Easy to say, and we haven't done it in the past. Well, maybe this is an opportunity to do it right.
Well, then are we really on the cusp of yet another series of treaties where we had in the past, where we've had, we're not going to use nuclear weapons, we're not going to use chemicals, and AI is going to be a similar conversation in the UN? And would those documents be worth the paper they're written on anyway, is an open question. But what do you think? Is that kind of like eventually where all this leads from a security perspective, is we need to find a way not to quite literally destroy our collective societies, whether you're totalitarian or democratic or whatever it may be?
I don't see a lot of treaties being written. I mean, we have the SALT talks and all the stuff around, nuclear weapons and materials. And of course that, has, extremely dire consequences if it's, handled in a bad way, in a wrong way. I think we're definitely likely to have, export controls on AI technologies, right? Imagine just like we have for encryption, right? We don't want this level of encryption being used outside in certain countries and things like that. I don't know. I don't mean to be, I'm not a conspiracist, but I am a skeptic about some things. And the government or the UN or being ahead of the game on making these kinds of decisions when it's just being created now and we're just figuring out sort of the applications of it today, I don't think that's going to happen. Now we're going to end up in situations like we have with China around search, where the data can't go outside of that country. It can't leverage information, use information, or use tools outside of that country. I think that's definitely going to happen, probably is happening, right?
I think Steve C may be onto something in that he's listed at least his first wish list is what I would call it, because I think the wish list will get bigger. But he wants to use ChatGPT to identify vulnerabilities based on the OWASP vulnerability list. I don't think somebody's gotten there yet, but I imagine that's probably coming, and there's probably a long list of these things that people should want. So we can obsess about the negatives, but maybe we should just start coming up with that proverbial holiday list of things we want this thing to do for us. What do you think?
Well, OWASP top 10, a lot of that have been there for a while. If we could just crack down on cross-site scripting and SQL injection, and I think we're better at buffer overflows and things like that. But it's still, I just read about a vulnerability with Python in basically doing a DOS attack by giving it a big enough value for an integer in a text form. So, I mean, to that point, I think that's a great problem to solve. Imagine if we cut down on, 3 of the top 10 in the OAuth top 10. That'd be fantastic, or at least made a big dent in it. Absolutely. I'm all for it, Steve. Let's work on that together.
I think part of the frustrating thing about cybersecurity is that it is the same damn vulnerabilities over and over again, and the same mistakes are made over and over again. And if you're on the cybersecurity side of this equation, you're probably banging your head against the wall over the years going, how come we can't ever seem to remediate this low-level stuff? And maybe we can challenge the bad guys to do something more interesting, because what they're currently doing is the path of least resistance, right? It's just, they're not going to do anything more complicated than they need to achieve their goals, right?
I describe it as hackers are like salespeople, not in a bad, I don't mean to make that connection in a derogatory way, but they both follow, they're like water. They follow the path of least resistance, right? They will go for the outcome. I'd like to use you to use our product. I'm not going to find the difficult way to sell my product to you. I'm going to find the easiest way, right? And same thing for hackers, right? I'm not going to bang myself against the wall and trying to try this really sophisticated thing when I can just send you an email and get you to click on the link. If that's going to work, that's what I'll do. If I can find something easier, I'll do it easier. And so it's oftentimes, yes, there are very sophisticated, advanced threat protection and things like that. But there's also, most of the stuff today is configuration issues, existing vulnerabilities and patching, cross-site scripting, etc. A lot of those things still exist, are the source of many, if not most, of our hacks.
All right, folks, I think we're going to end on a note of optimism from one of our attendees who says, hey, maybe we'll just make connections we haven't been able to do before, and the pluses will far outweigh the negatives. Everybody cross your fingers and toes and hope that that's how it happens. Hey, Mitch, thanks for hanging out with me and spending some time going through this stuff. I'm sure everybody, at the very least, has got something to think about. Cody,
I do as well. Thank you much, Mike. Appreciate the conversation.
All right. Well, Mike and Mitchell, thank you both for joining me today. I'd like to thank our audience for being here as well, and award a couple of our attendees with some gift cards. So each of you will be receiving a $25 gift card if your name is Louise S., Glinda R., Waverly E., and Vladimir M. So to our 4 winners, keep an eye on your inbox. You should be receiving an email with a link to access that gift card. You should get it within about 24 hours. If you don't receive it, do let us know or check your spam folder. I'll also remind everyone that this session was recorded. So should you want to rewatch, or maybe you are so inspired that you want to share this with a friend, you can access this recording on the Security Boulevard website at securityboulevard.com/webinars. And you will also be receiving an email with a link to watch it. So I would like to thank Techstrong Research for lending their talents and time for today's program. Mike, Mitch, thank you both. And to our audience, we really appreciate you being here for the last hour. We do just want to ask for one extra moment of your time. There will be a survey that pops up, so let us know what you thought about our program today. But otherwise, we hope to see everyone at an upcoming Techstrong Learning Experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, guys.